Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of BCP Audit and Governance Committee. This is an additional meeting, and what we've done with the agenda is to add 3 items of business before the presentation that we're going to get from the Head of Strategic Procurement after we've dealt with those items. So we'll go straight into the agenda, and I'll ask Mr. Hanton from Democratic for apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Cox, and Councillor Poivden is substituting for Councillor Cox. Also apologies from Councillor Slade, the Leader of Council.
Thank you very much. So that deals with item 2 on the agenda. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations? No, there are none. And then item 4 is confirmation of minutes. The minutes from the meeting held on the 20th of February 2020 have been circulated. Are you agreed, members of the committee, that they are a true and accurate record of that meeting and that I should sign them? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Hanton, I'll revert to you for item 5, public issues.
Thank you, Chairman. There's been no public questions. There has been one statement submitted, and in accordance with the Constitution, that's been tabled for members before the meeting. The statement is from Mr. Roger West, who is in the audience, but has asked me to read out the statement again as provided in the Constitution, which I'm now going to do. The websites of Pelhams are key. The historical background and the activities are vital to your decision. My guiding principles were helping residents and telling the truth. Impossible with party politics. Joined the BIA. See abetterbournemouth.org. Supported Christchurch in their fight against joining BCP. Received 3 letters of thanks from Sir Chris Chope MP. Communities are vital to us, e.g. Ensbury Park Library, Post Office, Park Homes and Pelhams. 27/7/2013, asked John Beasley to resign. Had great concern Pelhams would go like the BCCA in Boscombe. False evidence was produced. I'm now reassured the BCP will protect it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanton. Ms. Coulter, I think you were just going to make a comment about response.
Thank you, Chairman. Just that, as you are referred to within the statement, if you wish to make a comment, you may, but of course you are not obliged to.
Thank you very much. Well, I won't make anything specific about it because I don't quite understand the deputation, but what I would say is that if Mr. West has, on this occasion, some evidence on this item or any other that he feels should be referred to the police, then that's what he should do. So that does take us on to item 6, which is the Kinson Community Centre, and we have with us Kelly Ansell. I think, Ms. Ansell, you're going to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, this is an update report and a continuation of the reports that were provided to the Audit and Governance Committee on the 25th of July last year and the 10th of October. The report summarises the current position. It confirms that a third-party referral in respect of allegations made by Kinson Community Association has been made by the Council to Dorset Police. That was undertaken in November 2019. The report outlines the advice that we've received from the police, which was received in February, that any subsequent criminal investigation must take primacy over any civil or internal procedures that the Council may take. And as a result, at this time, no further action can be taken by the Council until the position relating to any criminal allegations is fully understood and those investigations are concluded. Whilst that's happening, of course, my team, the communities team, will continue to engage with Kinson Community Association in respect of our landlord-tenant relationship regarding Kinson Community Centre. But at this stage, it really isn't. This is a matter for the police to engage with Kinson Community Association to determine. recommendation in the report asks that the committee notes that position and then delegates authority to determine any further action following the outcome of any criminal investigation to myself as Director of Communities.
Thank you very much. I wonder, Chief Executive, if you would like to add anything to what Ms Ansell said.
Thanks, Chairman. Nothing specific to add. I think this is the appropriate recommendation. So we have made the referral to the police. I think the request has to be, if anybody has any evidence of criminal behaviour, then please pass it to the police. That is the only way that any action can be taken here. So if people genuinely believe something has been of criminal nature, then must provide that evidence to the police. Other than that, I think there is nothing more the council can do at this point.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Notwithstanding the police activity on this now, I think there is an issue that is still outstanding that will require this committee to look at once the police have concluded their investigation, and that is the burning question of what the council's liability was towards the Kinston Community charity in its obligations as an employer of the individual that was has been subject of these accusations. So I think that recommendation A is absolutely fine, but I would like to see that once the police have concluded their investigation, that this matter is brought back to this committee for final close off and deciding what responsibilities, if any, the council had towards the circumstances that led to this situation at the community centre. So I would like to see a change. In fact, I would like to see that recommendation be deleted and changed to say recommended that the matter be brought back before the Audit and Governance Committee when the police have concluded their investigations.
I wonder, Mr Farrant, whether you could respond to that in the light of the reports that we've previously considered and the process that's being undertaken with the police and indeed with other authorities, I believe, subsequent to that.
Very, very happy to. Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if I could just rephrase Councillor Bartlett's suggestion and say I'm very happy to come back should we find that there are any implications for the council or any responsibility. But if there is a ongoing police investigation and no evidence comes forward, we don't quite know when they're going to close that down, so we wouldn't know. But I'm very happy to say that if there are any implications, we can report back. Maybe it's to report back to the appropriate committee. I don't know whether. So Audit and Governance Committee would not normally follow up a specific case in this way. Any decision that was taken about liability would normally be a decision for the Cabinet. An Audit and Governance Committee would normally see that through that process. So my sense is to put this issue into normal procedure. If it's something that needs a Cabinet decision, then we'd take it to the Cabinet. If there is no implication for the Council, we would just have an outstanding minute for a long time, which I'm not sure there's much point in doing that, to be frank. So I would suggest we're happy to commit to bring it back if appropriate, happy to commit to bring it back to the appropriate part of the Council for a decision if there are any implications. I just wouldn't want an outstanding minute that just sits here for a long time without being able to respond to it.
I think also, Councillor Bartlett, we do need to be cognizant of what the Chief Executive is saying in the sense of where it next goes. And we have to remember, I suppose, the history of why it came to Audit and Governance in the first place under the former council, Bournemouth Borough Council, rather than BCP. I think we need to be mindful of the fact that the process has moved on and it may not be the appropriate place for it to come back to anyway. I do think that, given the implications of your question, it's for the head of paid service to make that decision, since I think what you're referring to is a personnel matter, essentially. And in those circumstances, it is the head of paid service who would make that decision. Would you like to respond to those comments?
Yeah, just to clarify this, there was an assumption in the independent investigation that the individual was employed by the charity when actually they were employed by the council. As the employer of that individual, that would place certain responsibilities on the council for the way that individual was behaving, because you can't abdicate that employer's responsibility. Now, the Kingston Community Centre claim that the charity claimed that they were significantly financially impaired as a result of those activities, which, if their employer has a responsibility with regard to that behaviour, then there could be some potential financial liability on the council. And that's the point I'm trying to make. That point has not been clarified, and it's still fundamental, and it's out with the criminal charges or criminal investigation. It is a separate issue which the council has still not yet addressed, and that's why I'm raising it. And I believe that's why I'm asking it to come back to this committee for a determination on that one particular aspect of this whole issue.
Ms Ansell.
My response really would be it's difficult to give a response at this stage, given the status of the state of play in terms of the potential criminal investigation that the police may undertake, and given that the issue of our responsibility as an employer is linked to those potential those criminal allegations. I think that's a challenging position for us to discuss in a public forum, and without any understanding of where this may lay in terms of the police's action that they may take. That's really the only comment I think I can make.
The outcome of all of that work could be that it ends up in another place, I think. And if it ends up in another place, it's none of our business as audit and governance to be trying to do something in parallel, because that's not how the authority works. It can only be going to one place. So hence my reluctance to try and prescribe where the council goes with this, if indeed it goes anywhere, at a stage when it's premature, because we don't know what that outcome is. We could tangle ourselves up if we're not careful, I fear. Do come back. You're certainly Councillor.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I believe there's still an open issue where it comes back to eventually, but there is a public interest here, and it needs to be addressed, be it here or another part of the council. It does need to be addressed. It won't be addressed by the investigation, although it will be related to it. But one way or another, that issue about any potential liability to the council does have to be addressed. And I'm not sure that by delegating it to the service director is the appropriate way, because of the public interest in this particular matter. I believe it does have to come back to a public forum at some stage. Whether it's this committee or another one, I don't know. But I still think it is open and it needs to be closed down.
Chief Executive?
Yeah, I wonder if I could suggest that if I'm happy to undertake that if there is a significant implication that comes out of further discussions with concerned community association or from any other investigation, that we would report that to the appropriate committee or the appropriate place, which may be Cabinet, may be here. If it's significant, it would show in the accounts anyway. If it's not significant, maybe something which the director can deal with through her delegations. But we would report that somewhere. So I'm happy to give that commitment. I suppose I'm just reluctant to say Audit and Governance Committee, but absolutely happy to give that commitment if that would help.
So given that commitment from the Chief Executive, that outcome can be conveyed to members of this committee at the appropriate time by the Chief Executive. I would be very reluctant to go further than that this evening, because I think it's premature, but I think we've got that commitment from the Chief Executive within what these recommendations are before us. I feel that that is the check and balance that you're seeking, and I know that the Chief Executive will honour that at the earliest possible opportunity. So time is somewhat of the essence in that respect. Does that satisfy you for this evening?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee? No, in that case, we'll go to the recommendations. We've got two recommendations in front of us. I think for clarity, I will take them separately. So the first one is to note the update. Can we all be in agreement with that? I'll take it on a show of hands, I think.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. The second is to delegate authority to determine any further action following the outcome of any criminal investigation to the Director of Communities. Do you want to add something to the effect of what the Chief Executive has just stated?
Yes, please. Maybe the Chief Executive could just put some words onto that that would satisfy me. Thank you.
I wondered, Chairman, whether that was something that we could minute, that the Chief Executive gave an undertaking to report any significant outcome to the appropriate body, rather than necessarily having a recommendation. I don't know if that would be easier.
I think it's just as binding, actually, yes.
Yes, yeah. And Bob, have you got that as a minute?
Yes, Chairman. I've already minuted that undertaking, so I can add that as just a minute, and then we can go. If we want to, we can take the two recommendations. We need to vote on the second recommendation.
Indeed. So I think what I'm going to propose is that we take that second recommendation as stated in the papers, and we've got a minute separately within A&G minutes reflecting what the Chief Executive has proposed. So could we take that second recommendation on the delegation of authority? All those in favour, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Chairman. 4. And those against?
2, Chairman. That's carried too.
Thank you, members. That takes us on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the evolution of financial regulations for the 2020-21 financial year. And that is at report agenda item 7. And I'll ask Mr. Stannard to introduce the report. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So, as the Chairman says, this is the report on evolving the financial regulations for 2021. Just a tiny bit of background, first of all. The financial regulations form part 5 of the Council's constitution, and they have been in place since the 1st of April 2019. So we have had a set of financial regulations for BCP, and what we're trying to move to is an annual evolution of these, so they don't so we see an evolution as a business as usual, an annual activity, and we don't have a big deal every 5 years, a massive rewrite of financial regs, which requires a lot of input from everybody to get right. Working through the paper, as such, that this means being part of the Constitution, it does need to be approved by full Council, and it's planned that this will be on the 31st of March meeting of full Council this year. So working through the paper, if I may, just a couple of points, significant points. Section 8 of the report is in tabular form and tries to give a feel for the changes that we've made in financial regs, which are in red throughout the document. There are a number of what I call minor editing changes. So, for example, throughout the document, we've used new BCP terminology. So, for example, corporate directors are referred to as that instead of executive directors or legacy council terminology that may have been used in earlier versions. Part F, we've done some tidying up of requirements for leases which are necessary to comply with accounting practices that are changing on leases next year. And we've also abolished the use of petty cash floats throughout the council to fit with modern standards of procurement. However, there are a new terminology called client cash floats, where in exceptional circumstances we do need to give cash out to clients and customers for whatever reason. We have client cash floats to do so. Part G is completely in red in the document, and that implies that there's a significant change. In reality, what we've done there is reordered a lot of the existing text to more flow in the way a traditional procurement is undertaken. So although it looks like a radical rewrite, there is in fact very significant commonality with the old regulations. What is new is some sustainability elements, so to enable the council to more rigorously follow the obligations in our climate change and ecological emergency. So they are all now embedded in the financial regs, and in Jeremy's later presentation he'll go through those in a bit more detail. Elsewhere, the functions of the Audit and Governance Committee were at Appendix 2. They've been fully rewritten, as you recall. We had an earlier meeting in November to go through those. So those have all been incorporated into the SIT for best practice for functions of the Audit and Governance Committee. And finally, from me, we've got rid of an old Appendix 4 called Hot Topics. What this was an appendix which legacy councils used to highlight areas of financial regs non-compliance in the past, and it was almost a don't get caught out by these, because some officers in the council have already been caught out by these. So it was in effect a duplication of what was already in the financial regs, and that caused a lot of confusion in BCP Council, so we've just got rid of that appendix. I'll leave it there, Chair, and ask if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stannard, and on behalf of Audit and Governance, thank you for all the hard work you've put into this. It's easy just to put it in front of us and say a few words, but I know that the hard work has taken place over a long period of time, for which we're very grateful. Are there any questions? Councillor Bartlett.
Just a couple of general questions. On paragraph 6, it talks about the regulations is supported by a series of financial procedures and strategies. The question is, where are they published? How do you get it? Is it on BIS or is it? You're right. Some is on BIS. BCP Council has its own intranet now, and they are mainly located there. Although there are a few legacy elements of procedures that are still valid and are located on BIS and the Loop, indeed, and the Christchurch alternative. But by far the majority of it is on the new BCP intranet. Thank you. The reason I ask is because the financial regulations used to have a supporting document that was a guide to the financial regulations that helped you through it and understanding it. And I'm not sure if that document still exists or it's been now replaced by these procedures here. And trying to, find them sometimes is a little challenging.
You're right, Councillor Bartlett. That how-to guide is defunct now, so there are a clearer set of procedures. For example, in the procurement area, there's a significant volume of aide memoirs for staff and commissioners to follow to enable them to work their way through financial regs.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more. It was on page 71 of this report and 554 of your report, and it's AM8. Any acquisition of ICT equipment and ICT services, all acquisitions to be, and that's delegated, I think, to by ICT services or with the approval of the head of ICT. And I'm just wondering, does that still come with the financial limit delegations? Because it just occurred to me an ICT installation might cost many millions of pounds. So, what is the relationship of financial delegations to this particular delegation?
Thank you. The simple answer is any installation of any value. There is an accompanying procedural note which is a definition of what does it mean by ICT equipment. So, for example, that encompasses as small as expenditure as a laptop. So a service director cannot go away and buy a laptop from Staples without the say-so of the head of IT. So unlimited.
Understood, but the sole delegation for acquisition doesn't rely with one particular head of ICT, does it? In terms of a major, technically, obviously, it needs to be approved, but the capital expenditure wouldn't necessarily be delegated to the head of ICT, or am I wrong in that assumption?
If I can just be clear, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Councillor Bartlett. So that refers to control of the technical environment. The financial delegation limits still exist. So, for instance, Katie Lacey as Service Director for IT and IS, there are still things which roll up beyond her for my approval, for instance.
Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. Section 6, which is on councillors, if I've got it right. Top of our page 29, there's what I'm assuming is a totally brand new statement about budget proposals and three clear working days. I was just wondering. I mean, I welcome the specification. I was just wondering whether the 3 clear working days is actually sufficient. It's putting it very close to the actual council meeting when the budget's determined, and whether the CFO would actually have sufficient time to go through. And didn't we? I'm trying to recollect in Poole that it used to be something like seven working days or a week. I'm maybe wrong.
Mr. Stannard.
This has been worked through with the CFO, who is happy with this 3 working days. It is trying to strike a balance between, exactly as you say, the time for Adam and his team to work through the implications of the alternative budget, but also giving members a fair, reasonable closeness to the meeting to actually have considered the first budget that's presented when the papers come out.
Fine, thank you, Chair. That I'm happy with that. The other thing is a statement, if I may, which is just simply to say how much I welcome the section on sustainability and all the implications that has, including the use of local suppliers below the 25,000 limit, and putting that hopefully as a priority in our procurement process. So I really do welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Councillor Brooke. It was something that we discussed at the pre-meeting and the agenda meeting, and obviously it is something that is always important, no more so than right now. So thank you for drawing it to our attention. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to add a bit to the comment about the timescale, I think this was the timescale that we worked to this year with the alternative budget. And actually, I would hope that it wasn't a complete surprise to the Chief Finance Officer, a complete budget being presented 3 days before. I would hope that any councillor who's working up an alternative budget would have been in discussion with the Chief Finance Officer well before that deadline. That's the formal deadline. But I would hope that it wouldn't, that nobody would prepare an alternative budget and in full and present it with just 3 days to go. There would have been some contact beforehand, as I think happened this year.
Councillor Andrews.
Mr. Chairman, because I'm a property person, I've looked at, it's page 47 of the agenda here, but it's page 30 of the actual document about things that the corporate property officer and his colleagues will do. And there are some things in there which, because it's quite a detailed list of things that they are doing, and there's a couple of things in there which aren't there, which I thought we should possibly add to that list. Obviously, quite a lot of those properties are rented out. Some of those property leases are running out. There's a deadline, effectively, of giving somebody at least 6 months' notice to terminate lease to potentially increase the rent. Rent review diary and lease renewal diary. There's no mention that there is a diary in existence which will give adequate warning to do something. And another thing, again, a lot of properties which are rented out, tenants do things which they shouldn't be doing to the property. There's mention here that, gosh, we're going to monitor that they haven't sort of gone into occupation beforehand. But tenants carry out alterations to property without landlord's permission. There's no mention here, and it may actually happen, but it's not mentioned here, that they do an annual inspection of all the properties to make sure that the tenant who's meant to be there is still the tenant. They haven't done something to our property which they shouldn't have been doing, and so on and so forth. They may well be doing these things, but those two things about bringing forward rent reviews, lease renewals and annual inspections aren't mentioned. Thank you.
Mr. Stannard.
Noted. These are financial regulations, and some of the things that Councillor Andrews there are arguably non-financial matters that are in operational delegations to other colleagues in the council. But what I will do is I'll use Bob Hanton's minutes of how this conversation's gone, and take those away and make sure that those arrangements are in place with the relevant colleague, and perhaps email councillors that's all in place.
That would be very helpful, Mr. Stannard, and I'm grateful to Councillor Andrews for drawing it out, because it is about how we make sure that at the edges of the financial regulations we don't lose something else that is somewhere else in the council.
Just a very quick point to come back. There's a tactical thing sometimes on triggering a rent review, because obviously if the tenant has a break option at the review date, they normally have to give 6 months notice. So from a tactical point of view, probably you don't want to tell the tenant way in advance that the rent's going to double or whatever, because he's going to probably exercise his break. But it's a procedural thing, and they probably are doing the things, and they list lots of good things which they are doing. Those two extra things possibly could be added.
So, Mr. Stannard, we'd be grateful if you could circulate that once you've undertaken that piece of work. Are there any other questions? In that case, could we go to the recommendation? There is just one, which is that the financial regulations as shown in Appendix A be approved and referred to Council on the 31st of March 2020 for adoption. All those in favour, please indicate.
That's unanimous, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, members. Takes us to agenda item 8, which is the annual review of whistleblowing policy, anti-fraud and corruption policy, and declarations of interests, gifts and hospitality policy. And that's another paper for you, Mr. Stannard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Similar in principle to the agenda item we've just looked at, the first two policies, the whistleblowing and the anti-fraud and corruption, are evolutions, annual business as usual, annual evolutions of the BCP respective policies, so we get this into normal business rhythm. And the other policy, the declarations of interest, is a new policy which we looked at our January meeting, you'll recall, and you gave some feedback on some of the draft elements of that policy. So this is the final policy that management team have now signed off, and we're asking for endorsements of audit and governance on that one. So if I just talk through the three respective policies, whistleblowing first of all, in truth, you'll be very hard pressed to see what evolutionary changes have occurred on this policy. Again, the same principle, changes are in red, so there's a very minor couple of little intricacies on relevant acts and relevant bodies that have changed their name in the year. So the whistleblowing policy is there in BCP already. It's stood us in good stead, seems to be working. It's very similar to a whistleblowing policy of any council, frankly. So that's a relatively straightforward one. The second policy, which is the anti-fraud and corruption policy, similar extent. However, there is a very significant new appendix, which is Appendix E, which talks about the corporate offence of facilitating tax evasion. So this is a new element to the Council's anti-fraud and corruption policy recommended by SIPFA and the Local Government Association. And so we've slotted good practice into the policy. And I'll just talk you through a couple of the implications of that and maybe a couple of examples for interest. So a couple of really relevant ones to us. So IR35, you may be familiar with consultants that or self-employed individuals that are employed by the council. These people must now be paid on payroll, even though they're not employees of the council. So we deduct tax at source. If we didn't, and they evaded tax through self-assessment, we could potentially be on the hook for facilitating tax evasion. A couple of others on creditor type. So if we were paying a holding company of a company that actually did the work for us because we were asked to pay another company, that's potentially tax evasion as well. So there are a few very specifics in there, and they're all embedded in the policy now. So that's all from me that I wanted to point out, and very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stannard, and the comments I made on the previous paper apply just as much to this one in our gratitude to you and your team for working them up. Questions from members? Okay, well, we'll go straight to the recommendations if there are no questions. I can understand why there aren't actually. It is what it is, and we've moved ahead in the way that Mr. Stannard's outlined. I've provoked a question as a result of that delay in going to the recommendations. Councillor
Sorry,
White.
Chairman, I did have a question on the gifts policy.
Please ask it.
Yes, thank you. I mean, those of us coming from Poole probably recall that both councillors and senior officers, including the chief executive, would regularly get offers of free tickets from Poole Lighthouse, typically about once a year. It would seem to me, following the flow chart that you've got at the end of the report, that this would seem to be forbidden under this new policy.
Mr. Stannard.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor White. What we've attempted to do is in the section of the report, section of the policy, rather than the flow chart, there is an asterisk under the particular section, and what we've said is that there's any exceptions to these specific policy bullet points must be agreed in writing by the Chief Executive and lodged with the monitoring officer. So we have given, on the officer side, wriggle room for exceptional circumstances to be allowed.
I am grateful to you, Councillor White, for asking the question, because actually I think you or another member raised it previously, and it's good that it's been addressed in the way that it has. So I think that's a most satisfactory compromise. So if there are no further questions, we'll go to the two recommendations which I'll take separately. The first is that we approve the whistleblowing policy and the anti-fraud and corruption policy. All those in favour, please indicate.
Unanimous.
And the second is that we endorse the Declaration of Interests, Gifts and Hospitality policy as approved by the Corporate Management Board. All those in favour, please indicate.
Unanimous.
Thank you very much, members. That now takes us on to the original purpose of this meeting, which was a presentation on sustainable procurement. And this presentation is also in hard copy, which Mr. Hanton is going to distribute, not least so that you can follow it through and make notes on it if you want, hence the hard copy rather than electronic. An electronic version will be sent out after the meeting, most particularly since that we have a couple of apologies, so that those members can at least have sight of it in a timely way. So just to remind members, this is one of those items which I invited members to suggest areas where they would like to have more background, where they'd like to have a presentation, and a couple of members asked about procurement, particularly the sustainability side of it in the current circumstances. So we have Jeremy Richardson, who's the Head of Strategic Procurement Finance, to make the presentation. It'll be fairly high level, it won't take all that long, but there will be then the opportunity out of the slides and out of what he said for you to ask questions of him. So, Mr. Richardson, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. I'm not going to go through the slides verbatim, because as I say, I think we would be here for quite a long time. So I'm going to summarise some of the slides, and that's really why we've got the slide deck for you. And any further questions you may like to come to me, my contact details are on the back for any further clarification later on as well. I think the context is, for us, the timing is quite critical. I think with our declaration of a climate emergency, the corporate strategy, it is absolutely critical that through the sort of procurement process, that sustainability doesn't just become a tick box exercise. I think with our update of Part G, thank you, actually supports this, so that it actually is that first stage of making sure that we actually have sustainability embedded in the procurement process and that governance behind it to support it. The definition of sustainable procurement is where an organisation meets their needs for the goods, services and works in a way that achieves value for money on a whole life cost basis. Traditionally, we would look at buying goods, that's the price, not understanding that the costs around the sourcing, the buying, the maintaining, and then how that was then being ended, or the waste implications of that. So very much the premise is around whole life cost, so that the benefits are not only just to the organisation but society and economy, while minimising the environmental impact. So I think it's really very much around that whole life cost. What are we doing? What are we buying? And being able to deliver that through that sort of procurement process. Benefits around sustainable procurement is it is a powerful driver for delivering improved economic and environmental and social outcomes. It provides a very good way of cost saving through focusing on that whole life cost element that I just discussed. innovation and improvement. It gives us an opportunity to really sort of think about what we're buying. Traditionally, public sector are very good at maybe shopping and not really understanding the market. Do we investigate what we're buying? What are we looking for? What are we trying to buy? For what reasons? What is that life? So very much that pre-engagement stage is quite critical. And it's also the point of that we need to be transparent, and can we create new markets delivering for sustainable product, goods, and again services in a way that can support jobs and grow businesses locally and with that sort of green agenda. So it's being able to give everybody a fair chance through that sort of process. So some of our sort of first thoughts around the future procurement strategy. And some of the elements we've started through the financial regulations will be embedding sustainable procurement in all that BCP does, so at all levels of procurement and elements that must be considered. Setting clear council priorities, and I think raising our bar. So traditionally, what standards have we brought to? Have we fulfilled, say, central government buying standards? Are there standards that we want to set? But actually really starting to challenge ourselves at what level we're buying goods, services, works at a sustainable level. I think we need to build the capacity across council officers in their understanding of sustainable procurement and sustainability, the impact across the council. As I just touched on, supplier engagement is very key, especially at the front end through the sort of pre-market engagement, business analysis. What are we trying to achieve? As I say, very much traditionally we would try and design something without much engagement with the market. Was there a market to even deliver it? Is it even deliverable? So again, sometimes taking a step back and taking some time of working with the market will sort of help deliver some of our solutions for us. I think as we just updated, and I'll touch on sort of updating the financial regulations around governance. We'll talk a little bit about sort of the pre-procurement planning stages and how do we measure where we are from benchmarking and how those sort of improvements are also made, I think is a very critical part of making procurement decisions. It's, again, very typical, we just carry on, but do we actually measure where we've gone and what we've done, especially now with our sustainability sort of targets we've set ourselves. The sort of 4 key principles really moving forward to are the fundamentals, our policy and strategy, enablers and process. Our first thing is really understanding what do we mean by sustainable procurement, the concepts, principles, core issues, drivers and key considerations, that we really are sort of building that into our sort of understanding. Integrating policies and strategies, the commitment that we need against those policies and strategies, the accountability and how they're implemented and managed and supported. Developing the procurement function towards sustainability, which is the governing, stakeholder engagement, enabling internal, external stakeholders within the process, setting our priorities, and again, touching on that measures and improvements. And the final element is really the process and integrating that sustainability into our procurement process. Planning, specification, again, as I just touched on, and I'll touch on again in a minute. The selection of suppliers, managing the contract, and reviewing and learning. So the 4 key sort of processes we are looking around that sort of area. Following on from the objectives, for us it's very much embedding those principles within the sustainability within the procurement process, and as I say, we'll touch on some of the sort of elements we sort of embedded into the financial regulations around sustainability. We also need to change our sort of core day-to-day thinking. We'll touch on the 4 R's and highlight whole life cycle. The way that we procure with local suppliers and actually how we engage them, giving them fair opportunity, transparency to those opportunities. And probably the other critical one is actually once we've let the contracts and that sustainability or as a whole of that contract, how are we managing that? Are we making sure that actually what we've asked for is being delivered? We are checking that. We are looking for improvements. How can we work together? So one of the first areas we've really sort of looked at and really embedded within our sort of financial regulations, but taken really good sort of procurement practice, is really looking at the 3 core stages of procurement. So plan, tender and manage. Traditionally, we'd probably say that tender was where we spend all our time with processes and regulations. And really the focus for us is to really change that round to say the tender process is a set legislative process, but actually the planning, understanding our requirements, testing the market and creating those appropriate documents that it is fair and transparent to all is an absolute critical stage. Our tender process is the way we advertise, and that's set against certain thresholds, how we evaluate, and that contract award element. And really, again, then pushing up the sort of where we need to focus on is that contract implementation, the management, and how do we contract end and review. So traditionally, it's not just about saying, we've run this contract, this is what we're buying, let's buy it again, go out to the market with actually saying it is that learning lesson. Do we stop? Do we need it? Is really one of the principles to embed there. So that last principle is really sort of built around the 4 R's: rethink, reduce, reuse and recycle. And I think it is very much about changing our behaviour. So traditionally, a lot of people talk about sustainability and building this into specifications and what we're buying and the way that tender is worked. But I think one of the areas we need to also sort of change behaviours is actually what we're buying. So we may have let the contract, but actually, do we need to buy as much? Do we need to? What are we buying under that contract? How can we reuse it? So again, it's really embedding that principle across the whole of the procurement process and the buying process that actually delivers a true sustainable solution. Next key area is really around whole life costing. Traditionally, public sector has been very focused about delivering what is the core cost of something, not necessarily the full life, cradle to grave cost against where we're at. So in the sense of the acquisition, the delivery, the installation, the commissioning costs, the operating, energy, spares, cost of maintenance, and end of life, decommissioning, removal and disposal should really be considered very much that front end pre-procurement sort of process, so that we can actually understand the true life of cost and what are those implications of those costs. Whole life costing really, for us, clearly identifies the procurement, including the reliability. For the example that's shown here is the reliability characteristics of a piece of equipment, for example. It might cost more to buy up front, but actually is that more reliable? Are we buying better quality that will actually last longer? Does it have a better residual value? Is it better? Does it save us in sort of recycling costs? So again, really trying to look at what we're buying, break that down, and deliver that through to create some of those areas. Key area for us as well is how do we really promote our local suppliers and SMEs? Regulations are very focused around SMEs from our regulations we operate under, but how do we also get our local suppliers engaged, whether it is on a lower value procurements or larger value procurements? I think it is how do we enable that? We want, whatever the size of the contract we're going to sort of tender, to be able to sort of enable all organisations to be able to tender for that. Make sure the complexity of the procurement and the sustainable requirements are proportional to the project. We see very much sometimes sustainability really stops some of our smaller suppliers because we're so specific about what we're trying to sort of buy, and it really sort of stops that market. So again, sometimes the use of sustainability has been seen as used as a bit of a blocker. Also that public sector have always been challenged that we've been passing our sort of sustainable sort of delivery ideals, our targets over to the suppliers, that actually we need to work in a much more of a partnership relationship with our suppliers, is again some of the challenges. We'll always talk about all opportunities that we have are transparent and that they're there for everybody to be able to tender and see. Touching on the final sort of element that we really feel that is part of our strategy over the next 12 months is really the sort of contract management element. We understand what we want to tender, we go to market, but do we truly then make sure that what's put into that contract is delivered through implementation and through the life of the contract? So very much moving forward, we would look at building especially sustainability requirements into our specifications. Historically, a lot has just been asked around questions. We've got to get better at actually telling the market what we want and what that is, so that then when we let that contract is implemented, that we are then checking that that is being delivered and sort of is set out within that sort of process. I think also with contract management, we need to sort of really work with our suppliers in a much more partnership relationship, so that we can identify, promote and develop areas of sustainability and any other improvements that can be made under that contract. And I think it's very much, again, embedding and training our sort of contract managers across the authority around some of the KPIs that should be built into those contracts, and they are being managed and recorded. Because again, I think there's a lot of what we've found with the sustainability team. We have some very good examples that we've shown and we've had over time, but are we very good at actually showing what we've done, how we've improved, and how do we benchmark those? And very much with that contract management, what have we learnt? You know, we learn a lot, but do we just go and make the same mistakes again? You know, very much build that learning into the future. High level sort of overview of some of the financial regulation changes we've made for Part G to very much embed sustainability into the process. As discussed, we've reordered the flow of the procurement regulations in Part G to very much, we haven't necessarily changed a lot of the text, but what we've done is we've reflowed it to make sure that it is following a good procurement practice, and that actually as officers, commissioning officers and the procurement support that's there, that we are following what the regulations follow how we would actually run a procurement, rather than it sort of was very much a jumped around type solution. We've looked at embedding sustainability processes within the financial regulations for the first time, so they are clearly set out. We've made some updates around our under £25,000 thresholds and the use of local suppliers, which is now fixed at sort of clearly a much more mandatory sort of level. And what we fixed in the procurement levels over £25,000 and our ODU processes, again, what we've embedded in those elements that we can legally, under the rules, to add sort of the sustainability elements that we require going forward. So the regulations in a high level, just to think about the cycle that we've embedded, we can really follow through the plan, the tender and the managed process. So we've been clear about the procurement options, the specifications, the market testing, the whole life costing, evaluation criteria and contract conditions. Within the sort of rewriting and the way this has been sort of scoped and cycled, it actually is probably the majority of the sort of product that we do through the financial regulations. A lot of the work sits under that plan stage. The tender process is very much set. It's usually, majority of the time, it is led by procurement, especially over £25,000. And so very much as a process stage. So what we try to sort of identify that moving procurement away from traditionally, it's very much a process-driven sort of situation, that actually we need to get better at planning and then the managing, which again we just touched on, that contract implementation, management, extensions and modifications, and what do we do at the end of life. Some of the options that we've embedded under our principles: ensure that good services works and concessions are procured in the most efficient, transparent process by sustainable and ethical means, ensuring accountability, achieving value for money, and deriving maximum benefit to support the BCP Council corporate strategies. Sustainability considerations are built into the specification. As I touched on before, traditionally what we would do around specifications, maybe ask a series of questions through the tender process, but actually what we want is to be better at actually building that into the specification and telling the market what we want. so that then when we're scoring actually the deliverability of those elements around sustainability, not just, again, following a sort of a tick box exercise. Sustainability impact assessment form that has been created by the sustainability team will need to be followed and completed for all procurements. So we'll have that as a standard process to really ensure that we are taking a view of the sustainable impact on each procurement, and even at lower levels, even though it may not touch a formal process, it does still have quite an impact. Rules we've updated for procurements under £5,000. We are now saying that all those procurements should be basically based around a local supplier. Officers have the ability to select and choose a single supplier, and we expect that to only be a local supplier where feasibly possible. What we defined as the local area is BH, DT and SO postcodes. So again, we've defined and really locked that down. And just for example, up until December of the last year, of BCP spend, about 65% was against BH postcodes. So there is some further work that we'll be doing to analyse sort of what that really means to us. But actually we have a lot of companies that may be seen as larger companies that are based in other parts of the country, but we have depots and that employment that is built within that depot. So the performance is probably better than we thought. But again, this is where we talk about we need to understand our data and move that sort of forward. For procurements between 5 and 25, which is still at an officer level, we're now asking for 3 quotes back. This must be as a minimum. And within that minimum, we would expect 1 local supplier, where relevant, to be on that supplier list. For procurements over 25,000, what procurement within our documentation, we will add within our selection questionnaire stage elements questioning around sustainable credentials, which is a pass-fail. So we will set minimum criteria that we expect those suppliers to be able to adhere to, or they will have to accept our future policies and strategies as a minimum. We've also embedded that all procurement over 25,000 against the quality criteria must contain a minimum of 10% against sustainability. And for service contracts against social value, those that set against the regulations, we would like to see services demonstrate that where appropriate, the social value elements against the Act have been followed. Probably an area that we actually do very well in, but we're actually not very good at recording the social value that we put in some of our contracts. Advertising processes for procurements over 25 and including ODU values. A fully advertised tender process is included. All required standard documentation timelines using the council system, so it must go through that. Again, the use of the standard questionnaire. An advert must be placed for 25 to ODU thresholds on not only our own tender system, which I think I discussed last time is free to all our tenderers. There is no charge. And it also must go on to the government's contracts finder system, which again is a free system that suppliers can log on and access opportunities. For obviously all procurement levels over ODU threshold, we then have to put an advert on the EU portal. That still applies at the moment, and there's no changes even with the Brexit exit. Our next steps really for us is really being clear about our vision, what our objectives are, and then getting those sustainable principles and standards in place for BCP. The need for leadership and governance. Those strategies need to be endorsed from the top and government process to implement and support those strategies. A shift in organisational culture will probably be required to the understanding of traditionally pricing and buying at cost, that actually sometimes buying and considering the whole life cost may increase some of those items that we buy, but actually in the long term there's no actual savings. So that's very much a sort of culture change. Supporting communication at an early stage, both internally and externally, is absolutely critical to sort of deliver sustainability performance. Training we see as a key area to drive forward. Different departments will need different elements around sustainability training, including sort of what that will be, depending on what they're buying, the speed and changes of where we see some future green papers from the government around what our buying standards, where we should be. So that can be crossed from everything from construction to vehicles to commodities. Example, our utilities and how they may be bought. As I'll keep repeating myself, embedding that into contract management, sustainability. Really getting used to being a public sector organisation and talking to our suppliers. There's a sort of a belief that we can't talk to suppliers and have conversations prior to procurement. Anything we learn obviously has to be fairly shared against in that tender, but again, we shouldn't be frightened, and the rules don't restrict us from talking to suppliers, understanding what the market, what is deliverable, and where we should really take that. And that really, that sums up that sort of quickly. Can I just say thank you for your time, and hopefully I'll have a few questions, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Richardson, for the time and effort you've applied to this since I asked you to undertake this task, and I hope members appreciate the effort that's gone into it. And I can well understand why some members wanted this to come before us, because quite often procurement, and most especially right now sustainable procurement, is a bit of a dark art that we haven't fully understood, I would imagine, as members. And I hope this has helped a little bit. In a practical sense, of course, at our next meeting on the 30th of April, we will be considering our sustainable procurement strategy. So this is, if you like, the background in a very timely way to that agenda item in just over a month's time. So, members, questions for Mr. Richardson?
That'll do. Sort of.
At least I tried.
You did, very. Thank you. Sorry. You were referring right at the end there to contact with suppliers and during the what has so far been done, and what has their reaction been?
We've always sort of encouraged commissioning officers to really engage and understand. I think what we've really managed to sort of probably impact in a very short sort of basis in probably over the last few months is probably the best example I can give is the future sort of project. We're talking about our operational design and development and our future technical support is very much getting those suppliers around the table, trying to understand what is deliverable, looking at whole life cost, how do we manage that? And I think the feedback from the suppliers was very positive, because I think it gave them an open forum to be quite honest, challenge us. And I also think for the officers, I think they hopefully got quite a bit from the responses, and I think we were challenging back to the suppliers. So I think it actually helped us sort of to build a relationship with those suppliers to when they come to bid, that we have a bit more understanding from both sides. Can we deliver and build procurement opportunities that actually the market actually understand, they want to bid for, they can deliver sort of sustainability, those elements around them. So I think it is very important, but it is a bit of a culture sort of shock, because I think traditionally we've very much sort of said in the past that conversation with suppliers is very sort of locked down. Well, when we hit a procurement process, yes, that's true, but that pre-market engagement, and as long as we're being fair and transparent to others, and that isn't sort of to the advantage of those in the pre-market engagement, is an absolute premise of where we need to move to. So it is important. We do it at stages, and I think that's become very important for us.
Mr. Oscathorpe.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, actually, having been part of that process and make an observation. So Jeremy has referred a number of times tonight about the kind of training or re-education that we need to do ourselves as an organisation. what came home to me was actually there's a lot of re-education that needs to happen to our potential suppliers as well. And I think there were some who responded through that pre-engagement process who had a mindset that was probably a decade out of date in terms of that we were a soft touch because we're a public authority, that we don't actually understand what we want, and that actually, regardless of what we'd said were our outcomes, they thought they could just turn up and try and convince us to buy X when we were actually saying we didn't want X. So I think the more, now that while it was a good process, it probably allowed us to help re-educate some of those fairly substantial organisations who through a structured tender process would potentially have wasted our time and theirs. So I think the re-education is on both sides of the equation, not just on ours.
That's a very useful comment. Councillor Dunlop.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the public body is still trying to shake off the image of being notoriously bad at procurement. It's very nice to see something like whole life costing coming in, rather than the days of just by the cheapest, because value isn't always the same thing. But with the balance here with sustainable procurement between cost, society and the environment, there is potentially a trade-off in terms of value for money. So it is entirely possible in that context that sustainable procurement actually costs the taxpayer a wee bit more.
I think that's absolutely correct, and I think experience in my past private sector life would be exactly the same, that actually when you start looking at sustainability, are you actually building in cost? I think at times you need to be very careful, and this is why that market engagement and understanding what are you trying to ask the market for is absolutely critical, because I think there is a danger that we go shopping and actually costs rise rather than that full sort of view of what do we want. But I think we do need to sort of understand much more around our full life costing. What is that doing? Because sometimes investing in especially plant and stuff like that, and actually traditionally buying something that's cheap, it breaks down, we're continually repairing, it has no sort of residual life, it's very expensive to dispose of. We need to sort of get that sort of view there and actually be able to balance that. But actually, this is the point of the engagement early with suppliers, so that we can start understanding some of those costs, develop that into our thinking, and actually strike that balance. Because there are times where we still tender against price and quality. So there is still that balance. And again, I think it is part of that sustainability assessment is what we're buying. Is there a chance for a sort of large sustainable delivery that actually can also drive sort of value for money? I think it's always very interesting around a lot of the procurement sustainability sort of presentations you'll see. It always actually starts around it will save you money. Actually, if you're buying less, if your full life cost is less, it is scarily driven by money, and some of the sustainability benefits that come out of that is that first thought is money. So I think again we need to strike the balance. Hopefully we've built some balance in. All procurements over 25,000 have to come to strategic procurement. So again, we're there to sort of make sure we're supporting, and we've got that sort of gatekeeper role of making sure that that's, we haven't got that sort of shopping appetite, that we are just buying something that we like that because that's what we want, and actually we need to demonstrate that that is value for money, and it is the public purse.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just follow that. Having been unfortunate enough to spend some time as a logistics support engineer working at McDonnell Douglas, where we had hundreds of people looking at whole life cycle costing, and the enormous cost and bureaucracy that can come with that. So the question is basically, do we have the skills to do it? Is the sustainable procurement likely to add to costs as opposed to saving money? It's a very general question, but there must be a cost to this policy. Have you got any feeling for how far away we are from being able to implement, this strategy?
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I think again interesting. I have worked in that world where endless modelling and costing exercises almost slow down your process as well. So there is some cost around how tied up and stuck in the mud you get against it. I think what we really need to sort of set out is, you know, looking at what category we're buying and where it is appropriate. Because I think, again, what we wanted to do is make sure that we've got the thought there. We're not necessarily saying everything will be bought at full life cost, but we've got to think where that sort of sustainability analysis takes place. Is there something there? Do we need to appreciate full life cost more? I think, yes, we could become busy fools spending a lot of time that costs us extra money by not sort of considering, actually, is that category right, you know, on that sense. There's some simple whole life costing elements, and I think we've just got to be careful we don't get lost in sort of full re-engineering product and stuff like that. I don't think that's really our core business. I think the way we deliver some of those services and stuff like that, we need to look at re-engineering and understand the costs. I guess for me, where I see that first stage is, let's understand our costs. Let's not just go out and buy something and then realise we've got to pay maintenance costs. Could we have actually built that up front within our contract? Make sure we're just thinking about what are those costs associated to what we're buying up front, so we've got a better understanding, I think, is really that first stage that we need to get to. I think we'll mature into the process. I think, again, we've got to move away from probably the traditional public sector buying and really work into a partnership with some of our suppliers, because that's, again, we should be driving down cost. Is there better ways of buying? Is there better ways of delivering? You know, and we need to build flexible contracts, because, again, our contracts have been quite fixed, so we go out to a specification that is, we think, is what we want at that point of time. That market is developing, but because we've written our contracts quite tight, our specifications, we haven't built any room to work with our partners to say, well, could we develop this? Could we reduce this? Can we change that? Without getting into complex contract changes that, again, become costly and sometimes quite adversarial.
Councillor Andrews.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was looking at your criteria for a local supplier, that anybody or any company in the BH, DT or the SO postal code regions. Obviously, the SO postal code goes way up to Winchester, and you know the TT one goes towards the borders of Somerset. I probably am guessing the answer to this one is, but I'm assuming that when you look for this local supplier, you presumably try and exhaust a supplier in the BH postal district first, which is commendable, reference sustainable, but also obviously there's a sort of ripple effect. Obviously, if you do buy goods and services from a local supplier where he lives locally, his children go to school locally, it benefits the council and the people for other reasons as well. So, you know, do we start off with the BH area, or do we, you know, just go on price, or what?
I think very much at those levels it is the balance, but I think BH is our focus. And I think actually looking at some initial data from the first sort of 6 months of operating, we really have sort of focused. We're probably better at going to BH postcodes than we probably even understand ourselves. So we're working on some of those categories who we've actually spent our money with. For me, I think we should be looking at BH as our primary element, but I don't think it should stop us sort of with those boundaries and where we take them, because again, you know, sometimes there's a cost element, and actually do we have those skills from day one to develop? I think what we want to be able to do is those people within that BH area see the opportunities and become much more transparent of what are some of those lower value tenders and stuff we're putting out into the market, and how do we broaden that, make sure people have got sort of, oh, that's something I could actually do. And I think that is the focus that we really need to sort of get within our sort of BH sort of code.
Councillor Andrews.
So just a quick comeback. Where perhaps a local supplier doesn't meet our requirements in terms of something or other, that he hasn't ticked all the boxes, do you have a system whereby you go back to that supplier and say, look, you didn't win that tender, a very simple thing that you didn't do, you didn't supply to us your environmental policy or something like that? Do you give them feedback?
Yes, we do. I think, and actually it's probably something we've been doing for probably the last couple of years, is probably engaging suppliers, even at the tender stage. We don't have the opportunity to allow suppliers and us to go back and saying, oh, if you've done this through the tender process. But I think what we try and do is, if we identify gaps, that we can go back and fairly ask those suppliers, is there some answer or some reason that this is the answer, because it may not be quite clear we've done. I think we're very clear on our, especially over approach over 25,000, and especially our legal elements we have to do on the sort of high level procurements. We actually have to do that as a legal requirement, give feedback through the award, and they have the ability to ask for further feedback. We do try and talk to those suppliers. We try and engage early market engagement of what we're doing. We can't necessarily help them per se, but we can try and help them through the process. So we do try and sort of engage in those. Still feedback is it's a complicated process, and this is why we've really tried to sort of simplify it and make it cleaner under that 25,000 sort of bracket. That actually we're not going to put formal process in, we're not going to formally advertise. This is very much those officers being able to go out, reach out to those local suppliers and get them to sort of try and simplify that process. Because again, it starts as it ramps up, it gets more complicated. I think again where we could have a good opportunities in local suppliers. So again, we're looking and waiting for legislation to see what will happen under the procurement regulations. Government are indicating that it's very much support about SMEs. We would maybe like a lifting of the mandatory lower level of advertising, so actually we could raise that, and actually that creates an easier process for us. But we're waiting on potentially where that comes from and feedback. So maybe towards the end of the year we could have some sort of hopefully some better developments. But again, that's really set under UK procurement law rather than European.
Councillor Dunlop.
It's just a quick one, Chairman. Am I right in saying, or am I wrong, that the EU public procurement directives and thresholds, they gone, or are we still in the period, they still apply in this transition period, which places some restrictions on us in our desire to stimulate the local economy and support local suppliers?
Yeah. Yes, that's still correct, Councillor. The regulations are still there at least till the end of the year. The feedback from government and Whitehall is very much, I think, procurement regulations with Europe will come down to some of the trade agreements and what is settled under there. What I would say about the sort of advertising Europe, yes, it does. Everybody feels it's a very complex process, but actually when you're talking about some of the levels of money, it is about transparency around that process. Sometimes you feel it's onerous, and actually could we do more for local suppliers in that sort of sense? I think as a pure process for those volumes, it is actually very good. But again, I would probably like to see some of the lifting personally, of lifting of some of the thresholds up a bit, so that we can actually develop more in a sort of local agreement for local suppliers and those SMEs that sort of then, depending on those sides of companies. Yeah. So the rules still do apply. Yeah, and the advert, we for us is we don't get a lot of European or global suppliers that are able to access the sort of European sort of thing. But I think what it does is it gives us a very robust platform in how we tender and process and the transparency around that.
Well, if there are no further questions from members, could I say on behalf of the committee a big thank you, Mr. Richardson, for your presentation. We'll get it electronically, as I said earlier, as well, to help those who aren't here, and indeed all of us. And I hope that this presentation can permeate other parts of the council other than those people who are here this evening, because I've always felt there's not enough knowledge by the organisation around procurement processes, and I think this puts it all into one place quite simply and in quite a straightforward manner. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Now, before we close the meeting, there are a couple of other things for members of the committee which I'd just like to raise. The first one comes out of the last minutes and is the issue about the self-assessment, which was one of those matters that in my first round robin to members asking for suggestions for future work for audit and governance, one or two members felt would be helpful. So we're doing this in two parts, if you like. You will recall that what we discussed and what's in the minutes was about using the SIP for self-assessment tool. Seems a good place to go, given that many other audit and governance committees are doing likewise. So we will be working that up specific to BCP audit and governance, and then putting it out to members so that you can put your feedback into that and mark it in the various categories that are put in front of you. Then we can look at the amalgamation of those across the members of the committee, and so that we got an idea on each of those categories of how we think we're performing. And we'll be doing something not totally dissimilar with the officers as well, so that we can actually gauge where we have weaknesses and indeed where we have strengths, and where perhaps we need further development looking forward, and also probably areas that perhaps require a little bit more attention of audit and governance than has been the case previously. So that will be coming out in the next few weeks. I don't want to give a date tonight because I can't, but just to let you know that it hasn't been put to one side, it is active and it will be coming out. And I hope that each permanent member of audit and governance will play their part in that. Given that we're not very many in number, it would be disproportionate if we don't. So I would encourage all of us to do what we can to participate. The other issue I just wanted to raise was that our next meeting on the 30th of April has, according to the forward plan, quite a number of items in there which are regular, routine, quarterly pieces of business, and which I think will occupy a 2-hour meeting. And our meeting, the following meeting from there, is another regular meeting, which is on the 18th of June. I did canvass members of Audit and Governance early last month about any items that you felt we should be considering coming forward. And generally those fall into two categories. One is, if you like, getting a better understanding about specific issues of the council, a little bit along the lines of what we've had this evening. And the other is on identifiable, fairly narrow pieces of business that perhaps require a bit more attention. It's fair to say I didn't get a lot of response from members with ideas, which I assume means that there aren't any burning issues for most of you. However, there are one or two that have come forward. There is one around constitutional issues, which I'll put to one side just for the moment, because that is something for a reinvigorated constitutional working group to consider. And that isn't currently active and live, but it will be again presently, I'm sure. The three others that have come forward, hence the reason for needing an interim date at which we can do at least one of these, are, I think it would be helpful if Audit and Governance were able to look at the new organisation, particularly now the structure charts have been completed, and obviously that will be something which is very much in the remit of the Chief Executive as Head of Paid Service, and indeed responsible for the organisational structure. And I think that is something which would be worthwhile and valuable, just so that we can make sure that we think that work, now it's bedding down, is completely fit for purpose, and that we understand what that structure is. A lot of this is about us understanding that so that we can fulfil our role. The second is around the structure and governance issues relating to the Bournemouth Development Company. And given that we try to address all of these issues on an apolitical basis, I think for the organisation that would be quite a useful piece of work. I think probably the most urgent one, and hence asking whether members feel that we should have a meeting between the 30th of April and the 18th of June, is specifically around the issues concerning BH Live and their structure, their finance, and the scope of the work that they undertake, and so that we can be clear, given that they are managing large and valuable assets of the council, so that we can be clear that in governance terms in particular they are fulfilling the remit. It is fair to say that I support actually all of those coming forward. They have come from a member, and I'm very grateful for the work that's gone into that to put those on the table. And I'd therefore like to try and come up with a date, I suppose by definition it's going to be in May, that is suitable to the majority of people, doesn't conflict with anything else, and when there's a room available. And I will ask Mr. Hanton if perhaps if we can go ahead with finding that compromise. I will then canvass members of Audit and Governance to make sure that all, if not most, members are available so that we can proceed with a date. I think we may be able to do something in addition to the BH Live one on that same date, because I would like to try and make sure that this work comes through in a timely way and we're fulfilling something which is of value. So if you're happy with that, most particularly the member who's brought those items forward, then I'll proceed with it and come back to all the members to make sure that we've got a date that works. Does that satisfy all those present? And looking forward, although only one member responded, in addition to myself actually, but I was writing to myself, it isn't too late. It is an ongoing process. So the fact that I haven't regularly written, I've done this twice, doesn't preclude you from actually saying, why aren't we doing this? And I can come back and check with officers and check with myself and the Vice Chairman and see whether it is something that's within our remit. So please feel free to do that. If you are looking for the email, I can't remember the date, but it was sometime in early February. So if you've perhaps overlooked it, please have a look for it and come back if you want to. Are we all happy with that? Yeah. Excellent. In that case, there is no further business on the agenda, and I close the meeting at 7:33. Thank you, members and officers, for attending.